Now let's take a look at the code behind this. First of all, we'll look at the configuration options for the page CRUD system. So I'm going to go back to the site folder here, and in pages, let's go ahead and look at the pages.php file in the admin folder. And you see we begin this process the same way that we did both our users and our products files. We set a title, and then we set some options. Let's go through the options briefly. We set the table, the item name, the display columns, which again align with what we see on the listing page. We have our ID column, which is the unique identifier, our default sort column for the listing page, and then our add edit columns, which determines what inputs we're going to see on the edit form. Now, for the most part, you'll recognize everything here, but we have one additional attribute that we're passing, which is type. Now, before, the only input that we offered was the text input. So no matter what type of content we were dealing with manipulating, it was all going to end up in a text input. Now, we're supplying this type attribute so we can offer both a text input and a text area. Eventually, as we matured this script, we'd add support for radio buttons, checkboxes, select boxes, and so on. If we want to take a look at how this is being processed in our CRUD script, we can open up crud.php. So I'm going back to the site folder, and in includes, I'll open up crud.php. And let's do a search here for type. So right here is our first instance of it. It says if isn't set the column options type, then we'll set it to a default of text. So this is in our add edit form, as we would expect it to be. And this is basically just setting the default to text. As we scroll down, we'll see this used one more time right here, where we switch based on the type. Now, text is the default. It's what we were building in our previous script all of the time. And so we'll render the input as a text input if something isn't set for this, or we explicitly set the type to text. But if it's text area, then we'll build a text area. We're pulling in the same attributes here, like the ID and the name, and then the content we're displaying within the text area tag, because it works just a little differently than it does for a text input. We also need to pass this through HTML entities, which will convert characters like left and right arrows and quotes into HTML entities so we can edit it directly in here without our browser interpreting any of it as potential HTML tags or characters. So this way we can safely use HTML within our text area and then display it here later as we're editing the content without it displaying as HTML. It will display as plain text here. And that should be our only real modification to crud.php. Another difference, which I mentioned earlier, is in our index.php file. So if I go back to our site folder and I open up index.php, right down here, starting at line 29, we have some logic that allows us to pull from a file if a file exists for this path. And if it doesn't, then we'll check the database to see if a path exists there. And here's how we do that. First, we set what the page path is. It's going to be in pages/path. So for example, when we go to about.php, that's going to be in this folder. Next, we're going to check to see if that file exists. So we're passing this path here to the file exists function, which is a PHP native function. If the file does exist, we're going to include it, and then it will behave just like our previous script did. But if the file does not exist, then we'll run this code here, where we run a SQL query, where we select all from pages where path equals, and then we pass it this path here. We run it through MySQL real escape string because this is coming from our URL, which anybody can modify. And we want to make sure that nothing gets pulled in that shouldn't be. And if there's a matching row, we go ahead and pull it into the row variable. We set the title to whatever the title is for that row. And next, what we need to do is pull in the content in a way that we can display it later. So we're going to use a convention that we used way earlier on in this series, where we use an output buffer. We begin with the PHP native function obstart, which is output buffer start. And what this does is kind of open up a new dimension where anything we would normally output to the browser gets captured in the output buffer. Now, because our content could have PHP in it at this point, we want to run this code as if it was PHP. Now, you've seen this convention used before as well. We use the eval function which basically wraps PHP opening and closing tags around what we have in here. And because of that, we need to actually close the tag and then open it at the end so we can run both plain HTML and PHP within this content here. So if you remember our About Us content, it includes just one PHP line that prints out the title. So once this evaluates, we're going to have our HTML, and it's going to be in the output buffer. So we pull that into a variable by using the ob_get_contents function, which again is a PHP native function. And then we do ob_end_clean. And what this does is it empties the output buffer so we can use that memory for other things. So whereas before we would have that content variable set in the page file itself, this time we're setting it dynamically after we process the content within the database. It still ends up in this content variable though, so when we use it in our page template file, we use it the exact same way.